Hello, everyone, and welcome to Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with Cindy Magnuson, and the show is about to begin. So, slow down, take a seat, put your feet up, and maybe take some notes, because this show is about you, it's for you, and it is designed to help you receive exactly what you need to be a happier and healthier you. And hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of Twilight Epiphanies Radio. I'm your host, Cindy Magnuson, and tonight I am initiating this series, Our Altered Histories. So to begin a little bit about why I might be entertaining this type of a topic, when I began my journey, which began basically when I was around 18 years old, and then I fell off the path like we often do in researching and trying to figure out what this dimensional space was all about. When I came back around to the path again at age 38, at that time, there was a different, very powerful influence around me, and I very adamantly wanted to understand how it was that the world got into this position that it's in, where there's such a significant amount of corruption here, deception and control in general. And while we were living our lives so far from what seemed to me to be a very different and much more appropriate way to live our lives, and that was the initiations of information that began to come back to me in regarding how we can heal ourselves by doing energy work, changing our diet, looking into some of the belief systems, additionally, that we were somewhat limiting our perceptions in. So as time went on here, and with recently, having so much opportunity for so much information to be out and about on the internet, very many people are able to post their current perception of something that they've observed in a different look at something that's been here all along in front of us, and yet didn't seem to reveal to us a different way of looking at it. And part of that was taking place is that we can begin, first of all, to look at the data that we have here in all of our written information about how reality works, and begin to think, what was it like previous to the written word, when language wasn't predominant and image and symbol was more predominant. And then two, a lot of people began to take a look at our building structures all around the world, a little bit deeper, closer look at the megalithic structures around the world. And as everyone began posting their literature of pictures and findings all around the world, people began to take a new look at what was around us in a different light. And this is the current brewing that has its tentacles in several different places already, beginning with, I don't remember the man's name. It begins with an F, maybe an Italian name, but there is literature, and one of our guests who's coming on will speak about this, about how our past histories have had potentially 1,000 years placed within to them that didn't actually exist, and that our timeline has been altered for us to think that events that happened in what we're perceiving as the farther long ago past did not happen that far into the past as we've been led to believe. And after that, then, many people began to take a look at the buildings all around the world and realizing that there is some type of an architecture here that is very similar and has unique properties to it. And in deeper looking at it, finding that these buildings could not possibly have been built per the stories and time frame that we have been told they were built. And those are parts of what, over the next 6 weeks after this, I am going to be having guests on whose specialties have been to look into this research and gather this information so that we can begin to see what is being revealed to us, coming to the surface as new perspectives on what basically has been in front of us all along. And I'd like to begin with going back again to some of the information that Phoenix, who did come on my last week's show, and we did a very long recording, but due to some scheduling changes that she wasn't aware of at the last minute, we had to record very quickly in a Zoom session, and in her location where she was recording in a big room, the recording itself was somewhat of a very poor sound quality. And afterwards then, she felt that potentially then it was just meant to let that show go, have it been received by whoever had received it in that time, and refer back instead to all of her literature that she has on her blog site. Now, the show was very significant to me and also part of beginning this series tonight. And the reason for that is because the information that Phoenix had presented and what she does present in her blogs brings us to a time of prehistory. Prehistory that is very important, that were oral traditions and a shamanistic way of living that was very close to nature and following the 13 lunar moon cycles and the seasonal changes, with a more matriarchal leaders in society where grandmother and mother elders were maintaining a structural system of keeping a lot of components between the worlds in line and keeping us connected to nature and nature signs in a very powerful way. Now, as I begin to talk about this, I don't want to place this in the reference that I am going to be presenting this from the standpoint that we are condemning the patriarchy or blaming the patriarchy. That's not the presentation here. The presentation that I'm going to open up with in regards to some of the cosmology type information that was changed and became a component of what and how our structures in society are operating right now is what is significant. The alterations where, as the ages changed and a patriarchal sun cult worship was going to already become part of a predominant structure, there were particularly important alterations that were done with some of our beliefs and thought systems that very much affected what is taking place in modern society today. And I would like to hold some of these important alterations in mind as we even go into these next 6 weeks of shows, in order to know that this is the place where we need to reunite with and step back into enough to dismantle, for both males and females, some of the false imprinting and concepts that we have adopted that were not truly meant to be part of a functioning, balanced society. Now, always in the back of my mind, in view of free will, experience, what level this general third dimensional space that we're inhabiting is functioning in, which can be relatively low here with all of the corruption that's here, and meaning that we can't also control not allowing imbalance to come in, but we can understand how it gets in order, especially for the reverse engineering, the dismantling, the walking back that we need to do, the bridges that we need to cross to find those intricate parts of memory that resonate so powerfully with us that we can place those new remembrances into their proper places and become more of a functioning whole again. And a main component of that, as Phoenix had talked about in the show with me, and I'd like to reemphasize here tonight for anyone new listening, was what took place with the Venus teachings. And what she was proposing in there, as her research had led her to, was that in the matriarchal societies, the grandmothers and mothers were always fundamental teachers and protectors and wisdom keepers within the circles of women and the sister circles. And what took place was Venus then became the group collective for the prominent goddess energy, and Venus being the principle of love and beauty and pleasure and for fertility. We are looking at the components of the Maiden. So Venus is more the Maiden. And what happened was Venus became presented as the prominent principal force that we should be listening to, that we should be following. And in the manner that it was presented, it removed the grandmothers and the mothers from the circles, from protecting the maidens, from being the wisdom keepers for them, from the teachings. And it doesn't take much for us to look at what we have happening in society right now with our maiden population, with our young women, that they have a lot of power to them without, in many cases, a great deal of wisdom behind them. And I'm going to do some reading from Phoenix's, it's her blog that is underneath her website, eldermountaindreaming.com, in one of her wonderful articles about Venus. So in her words, Venus was created, not born. Just like Jesus, who had no birth father, she had no birth mother, nor grandmother, nor matriarchal lineage, nor ancestors. She was created, fashioned, designed, and birthed by ancient men for men, built for a kingdom of patriarchs. And as she puts it, this is where old men and maidens ruled, as they have done for over 2 millennium. And she continues, our story of the animism roots, shamanic roots, then pagan roots, evolved into the goddess cultures, and lastly, the patriarch. Venus is a story of our past and past lives, and more closer to the real inner child issue than a goddess woman. And I would like everyone to really let that sink in there, how this root issue that so many people already have male and female in this inner child, can be literally traced back to these time frames when Venus was presented without this matriarchal lineage behind her. The patriarch had fashioned her with their fingertips, maybe not the same as scientists creating test tube babies, but the two are definitely linked by mythology, as in art reflects life and life reflects art. So again, I want to emphasize that statement there. Test tube babies. That's exactly the same energetic signature that's taking place here. Venus and Aphrodite, as we all know, is an ancient Greek goddess of love, beauty, youth, pleasure, and procreation. In astromythology, she is identified with the planet Venus, the sign of Taurus and Libra, with whom Aphrodite was extensively syncretized. Aphrodite was a very large and expansive, probably the largest on earth in all pagan cultures as they turned into patriarchal cultures. She derived originally from the Phoenician goddess Astarte, who was a cognate Eastern Semitic goddess Ishtar, a cult based on the Sumerian cult of Inanna. Astarte was connected with fertility, sexuality, and war. But we have to understand that there is the patriarch's war culture with 4 billion books to prove it. But war to woman is not men's world. War is not men's world. War is entrusted upon her of the war within. So here too, we want to reference a shift from the war within that was recognized in our ancient times by both our ancient patriarchs, prehistory, and our ancient matriarchs, that the war that we are supposed to be fighting is within, not truly an external war. So even when we hear something like Athena, the goddess of war, we are talking about the internal war. In other words, emotional truth, the senses, the empathic ability to read emotional information of lies and truth, and much more is so important today. We are in auspicious times as the end of the patriarch has already occurred, so we have to think and act auspiciously to keep our hearts with the truth of our health and well-being. In other places where alterations were contrived, along with Athena and Hera, Aphrodite was one of the 3 goddesses whose feud resulted in the beginning of the Trojan War, and she plays a major role throughout the Iliad. In other words, when men destroyed society, they also blamed it on Aphrodite, Venus, in what she refers to as a real love-hate relationship. And again, I want to emphasize that we are not talking about our general men population. We are talking about an isolated groups of individuals that come in and infiltrate as controllers and start to shift the collective perception in what always takes place here and what we can refer to as societal engineering. But as in all things expressed 2,000 years later of anything, the shadows rose of the patriarch, even Venus, Ishtar, Astarte, and Aphrodite too have dark pasts. It is because the ancient fathers and grandfathers left out one very important thing when they were building their kingdoms and a goddess that would serve them. They created the Maiden goddess, who would be the one who stands next to the king or in their bed at the cost of every woman on the planet. And what I'm referring to here then in saying is that they placed young women in charge who didn't have the wisdom. And in general, we can see how very many people are even writing about this in spirituality concepts, bringing us out of some of the concepts that were presented to us in the New Age, is that we need to go back to these wisdom traditions of understanding the process of how we need to develop our wisdom before we should be true teachers and wisdom keepers. And this is something that's fundamentally important to me because I can see how there are so many different aspects of what we have being taught with lesser developed concepts within them, and how that is taking so many people a little bit long. Say it's part of the story, but this part of the story says now it's time to notice this a little bit more and not to be judging and blaming and judgmental on it. My entire concept for presenting this is so that we have this information, not so that we can condemn any one level. As an example, I was reading someone's post online recently, and he had a picture of the different types of women and their major issues that they have. There was maybe 7 different women's pictures, and there was a little blurb on each one of them. And each one was a negative component of what the young feminine today are doing. And it, was describing how so many of our young women have gotten caught into these structured places and are not going past and thinking that what they are presenting themselves as is balanced, because there is not that grandmother or motherly space that has an influence as we used to have the influence in order to give the wisdom here. And the same is happening for our young male population that has gotten presented to themselves a very, very low level, for example, concepts on sexuality, on sex in general, on pornography. It has been, gone into such deep levels of darkness, and for our children to be exposed to this at such young levels, it's a very big challenge to bring them back up into the reality that this is not the norm. This is the abnormal in all contexts. So in completing the story with the gentleman writing it, there was a lot of heaviness and, pointing the finger at these women. And at the same time, in my awareness and understanding, I could clearly see this person who wrote this post has a very feminine persona, and basically he was pointing out something more about himself and from a past time frame. So there was himself in there. And these are the little, little intricacies that we need to be more aware of, that even if we are going to point something out, we need to realize that if it's really something so significant, and that we are going to point a harsh finger at someone, well, so they say that 3 fingers are pointing back at us. And instead of pointing blame, let's simply trace back to these time frames when our true balanced concepts were altered or stepped away from. Because certainly then what, as Phoenix points out, what has been created, that the evil stepmother and the jealousy and the evil, queens, etc., have become part of these stories from these imbalances that fell into these maiden stories that began to be presented. So as more got out of balance, yes, there was true aspects of imbalances being created on both sides. So the point is, we need to go back to when we had these concepts and how to stay with maintaining the respect for the elders and the mothers, remaining in the maiden circles and continuing to protect and guide them. So as we continue here, I'm going to quote some information from Sharon Hanna. Sharon Hanna from the University of Windsor says, I argue that the witch hunts of 16th and 17th century Germany evolved into the manifestation of a gendered power struggle as the male hierarchy attempted to reassert their authority in a context of religious upheaval and class conflict. I ground my arguments in historiographical context, followed by exploring the general atmosphere in which the witch hunts started. I showed that an anxious German male hierarchy used the pretext of language and values around witchcraft as a way to exert social control over male-female power relationships and reinforce conventional domestic ideals in a context of socio-political uncertainty. This is what happens when adult women and grandmothers are not in the circle with maidens. They go mad, get sick, drowned in drama, and there is no one to pull them back to safety because, remember, Venus has no mother or grandmother. The wish of men who created the patriarch and the sun cult was at all cost to rid the power of adult women and grandmothers with their truth and wisdom. And so, with that, it is our work here to remember to go back to those structures and concepts and reinstate them into the circles again, while also our male species here is part of us are healing their own side of how they moved into imbalance through these levels. We want to, again, shed all the blame, let all of that go. It's done. It's already here. And how can we fix it? And as we're all mostly aware of already, those of you listening, is that this is a time frame in the age of Aquarius here where we reunite the male and the female in their alchemical wedding back into the higher planes within us. More importantly for me, back into center. So, with that as our foundation, next I'm going to go into my next speaker that is going to be coming up next week with me is Jay of Jay Dreamers. That is his YouTube channel. And Jay is an avid researcher. He is a young gentleman who is going to start the series with his research, and all of the best of Jay is what I've asked him to present here, is the research that he is finding that gives us a look at the potential that geographically we have large stone mountain structures, what appear to be stone structures as mountains, all around the world. We have unusual formations, stone formations that look like large human faces, large beings that were up to 1 mile tall. So in Jay's research and having a strong background in reading Bible scriptures, he also studied Paleo Hebrew. He is a Marine. He was in the Marines and 9/11. He considers himself to be very much like a David Icke type researcher. And in his findings, and along with others who are having these same findings, additionally with scientific information coming to the surface by studying and finding that there is DNA, human DNA, in these stone structures, that in cases that appear to be either a large formation of an animal, such as a large fossilized elephant or horse head or other type of being, a giant, a titan, a large fossilized petrified remains of large mushrooms. So his research is going to talk to us about the very real potential that the stories that we have both within the Bible and other histories, cultural beliefs, all the way going into mythology, fairy tales, and again, cultural beliefs, that there were both giants in the range of 10 feet, 15 feet tall, and also titan beings up to 1 mile high, and large, much grander scaled animals did exist in our history with us. So he looks at those stories of the giants, the titans. He looks at the information and correlates concepts that have been presented to us in what we can look at as a disclosure, or even the people who are receiving, because they are artistic, they are receiving these concepts through their memory from the past that correlates comics, the Marvel comics, the cartoons such as the Smurfs, the TV series of movies, the shows, and he takes us through many of those different movies that have been and such that I mentioned that are presenting this information that titanic statured beings existed here at one time, and there were great battles here. I myself have enjoyed watching the Netflix series Once Upon a Time, and of course that is based on the fairy tales, and every time I might go back in and watch even just one or two shows, you can pull out more of the concepts that we are finding were a valid part of a reality that existed here in our histories. And I will leave it up to Jay to give us all of his more intricate details and his findings, and a look at, well, obviously we are then, as he's stating, looking at the ground beneath us, and many cases as being the remains of large beings, some of which were petrified and became stone immediately. Others then would have been, fossilized different within to the geography. And so I will let him talk about those different variations and the information that he can correlate together. And we also are looking at a story of how we so very often have these references to plasma type events with a serpent-looking electrified energy that is doing destruction, or is some type of demon being. And he puts together a lot of very interesting concepts, and I am looking forward to adding in there, of course, a lot of the research as an avid conspiracy theory individual myself who has looked at history for a long time and discussed some of these theories and potentials for what he is looking at as potentially a type of event, catastrophic event that takes place in different cycles. And that brings us back to then the cycles that were orally and systematically watched for in cosmology underneath when the grandmothers watched for the lunar cycle changes that were taking place, and then into the documentations through the patriarchal sun worship time frames, all of that compiled information about events that took place possibly around a meteor or a comet event, and what kinds of potentials could have taken place. So we are all within all of these shows are going to be discussing the potential for recurring cyclic events where there is either an actual firmament that is above our heads, and that firmament is broken through, and in a sense we can look at a portal and what type of energy experiences, events take place in those cycles where this always happens in recurring time frames. So we are going to be talking about the next topic that I began with was these architectures and buildings around the world that are all fundamentally the same type of architectures, and potentially these architectures here have the appearances of having been through significant mud floods, and where much of them in the first floor to almost the second floor level were buried in up to 12 feet of mud. So we're also going to look at the fact that these older buildings that were here have very large doors. And any of us who, take a look at the castles of the past, when we think about it, all the structures in those castles were very large. The doors were very large. So there is definitely a lot to think about as far as scale, and has the scale of human beings over different time frames changed. And I won't go deep into the different potentials of how many different stories could have played out here on this, because it would get too complicated, what we first want to do is let's look at some of the most apparent fundamental truths that we can see now, where hidden right before us in plain sight have been some very important signifiers that we haven't been privy to understanding what our true history was. And if there were these catastrophic events, then why, when we regrouped and regathered, was history documented specifically in deception? Years were added in, and important information about these buildings all around the world was kept from us. So next, after Jay coming on, Sylvie Ivanova of megalithics.org and the New Earth YouTube channel is going to come on, and in a very fortunate event, she's going to be talking to me exactly when she has just returned from an Italy expedition. So she will be sharing with me some of her current findings that she found in Italy. And what is fascinating, Sylvie has been a researcher who is looking at our altered and hidden histories from the standpoint of doing all of these expeditions and going to these large sites all around the world, these ancient ruins and sites of megalithic size and different stone structures, whether it's cut stone or polygonal masonry. And when she is filming them, when she compares what has been written about these sites as opposed to what she is seeing from a new perspective, that history has also been altered and not telling the truth about the expansiveness of and the significance of what we have in front of us here. So I'd like to just read a little bit about what Sylvie says about her site. For the superficial modern man, history has turned into an ocean of often highly questionable stories which do not even match with the historic sites and artifacts they are supposedly based on. And why do we as souls come here to wear these costumes called human bodies? And in the current times when evil so openly controls every facet of human society, reinstituting the truth about our divine origin is of great importance, because along with its historical aspects come some of the most ancient and very practical instructions that will teach us how to live in a technically advanced society with nonviolence, compassion, and kindness, and have no need for war, pollution, and the rest of the self-imposed evils brought on by the ignorance of modern man. Like, for example, being forced to comply with malicious, centralized institutions. So what she is saying in there is that what she is finding in these structures that are worldwide, and I want to emphasize that what we believe were different societies building these, for example, the polygonal Freemason structures that have a particularly interesting set of the huge megalithic stones being either cut or formed and set in place that are not in our normal brick fashion, and how this even went into the corners of the buildings, and how all around the world, they're seeing this same type of building. That, for example, with that says that we had a worldwide scenario where civilizations were in communication with one another, for one thing. So if we had the ancient flying machines, it would be easier for us to visit easily these other places, and of course, advanced technology, and have these similar large megalithic stone structures, because, as she points out in one of her videos, official accounts, for instance, of how they worked to raise some of the huge columns that were in these structures and buildings that were all similarly built with these large, very tall stones, columns, that they defy common sense of how they erected these columns, because they are saying that they raised these in short amounts of time there with primitive cultures. And here it would take, for us to raise this size column, it would take 2 or more days with very advanced crane systems. So in putting the information of looking also at, there are buildings that have very articulate, elaborate, very ornate building inside and out, huge doors, huge windows, tall ceilings, fireplaces that didn't have flutes going up, but had different types of some kind of operating technology in units that were placed in front of the some type of a machine maybe that was placed in front of the fireplace. And all of the buildings have a type of steeple, several steeples, several points on them. The structure is important. How did they light these buildings? So what they're theorizing is that in not so long ago, all of these buildings, and some of the pictures are running underneath the slideshow here tonight, and Sylvie's going to present more to us. All of these buildings have what look like antennae on top of the building, and it appears that at that time that also possibly there was a different type of energy to be drawn on, but we were functioning as a society that had free energy, and we were very abundant. And a general way of looking at all of these buildings has been referred to as Tartarian architecture. And this Tartarian architecture that we find all around the world, in every culture, in every place, has also a time frame documented for when it was stated that colonizers came in and created these buildings within such and such a time. And yet, according to what is written, it is not possible to have been creating these buildings that right now we actually do not even know how to reconstruct some of these buildings. And it's been pointed out that in all of the pictures and depictions and even paintings of these buildings, in many cases we see scaffolding up on the buildings in a reference to it being built, but we never see the actual building of the building in any place thus far. So the current theories of the people coming on are that these buildings were here before within a Tartarian civilization, and due to different time frames of catastrophic events that theoretically could have been solar events from solar flares, or something again like a comet or volcanic eruptions, a meteor event, a plasma event, or something like the poles shifting, and that these are cyclic events that do recur, and they're part of what gets written into, for example, the Bible, that Noah is advised that a flood is coming, for example. Well, if we were continuing with our traditions and interfering, infiltrating individuals and groups didn't come in and wipe out those informations by systematically utilizing the space of religion to come in and wipe out oral traditions, the connections, the indigenous population's connections to their ritual of maintaining a direct relationship with nature and knowing when these events were coming again, we would understand how these cycles are part of what we are living through. And it's been theorized that as recently as 200 years ago, we went through one of these catastrophic events that was a mud flood. And so also coming on after Sylvie is Martin Lidke, and his YouTube channel is called Flat Earth British. Martin is just a gem of an individual who has researched especially the Tartarian civilizations and the information that is coming to our awareness that if we look at some of these larger cities that had more of these mud flood type buildings that appeared to have been affected by mud floods, that a lot of these main cities also had giant historic fires and other natural disasters around them, such as Chicago. So cities like Seattle and Boston, Oklahoma City, Syracuse, Washington, D.C., Moscow, Paris, Cairo, they have a lot of these mud flood affected buildings and towns, and they've also had giant fires. So there's more information coming to the forefront that are our information about events that have taken place. For example, when we even possibly consider why Pompeii happened the way it did. As I was saying with the meteor event, that was the Tunguska airburst meteor event. And something like the Dust Bowl of the Great West. So what happened actually happened during that Dust Bowl on the Great Plains, where there was huge amounts of dust that were coming down out of the sky over a very long period of time. So what Martin is going to come on and present to us some of his information in his Best of the Best of Martin that he has brought to the forefront in his research. He has a wonderful support group around him where once he has begun here, and as I stated, what is nice is that people go back and begin to look at the architecture around them and the geology in very different ways. And even I was driving into the city the other day and looked at this old church that actually is not in use anymore and just has a fence around it. And it had all of the architecture on top of it, these antennas on the very top of it. And again, this is the same architecture all over the world. So this was built a long time ago. And what is being theorized is that the people who attribute their culture to building these buildings is not the truth, that it was primarily this one big, catch-all empire that spanned a large area. And again, on those particulars, I'm going to have my host come on and give us a little bit more information about those maps and what they saw. For example, on ancient maps, California was literally a separate island from the coast. And of course, now land has filled all in between there. So we had a different geography that was significantly different. So there is just enormous amounts of interesting information. And I was recently watching Martin talk about where he found information about this wave, this serpent that returns. And I had actually in my show that I did with Phoenix, she said, I would like to take one of your dreams and analyze it for you so that I can demonstrate to the audience how I do dream analysis. And I happened to choose the one dream from the past that talked about a big black wave coming in. And the dream was a positive dream, that even though this big black wave, this thus returning cycle comes back around and we cannot avoid what comes back around, the theme in the dream was that we can move ourselves, our inner selves, into a state of mind where this wave passes us by, and even when it comes back around again, we can keep ourselves safe from great harm from it. Now, when I say that, we're looking at, catastrophes happened and, many people likely perished in many of those. Now, transitioning in this time, let's say in any time in the past where a transition happened, what is most significant in any event that ever is, was, or will take place, what is significant is, are you prepared with a balanced inner frame of reference as to who you are, what work you have done here, and what lifetime you may be going on to next? So I may on one hand be saying with this that there is a way we can pacify, which I truly believe, these events taking place if we all more significantly upgraded and connected ourselves back to some of this wisdom that needs to come to the forefront and balance the practices that are happening here. If we're willing to do that work, to burn through the areas where we've gone off course and come back, yes, then we may be able to pacify some of the, let's say if it was a solar event, we could calm the sun, as Dan Winter has told many of us. We've listened to him say they have done an experiment where 1 million children meditated all at once and it calmed the sun. Our emotions, our input has an effect on our experiences that will play out through cyclical events, no matter what they are. We know we are basically in a time frame where there is a great potential to move into what we refer back to as the golden ages. How that plays out, how that works out, what the dream was saying most of all was saying be neutral. Okay? Now, neutral does not mean lose your discernment and not have boundaries and not make decisions about what is appropriate and inappropriate for you. It means that in whatever decisions you are making, such as if I am observing the past, that I can observe both matriarchal societies went out of balance in one area and patriarchal influences of some components had a significant relationship with that taking place. I can let go of any finger pointing, any blame. We're just talking facts, and stay neutral to the discernment that if that I see that taking place here, I can observe those events here and say that's not appropriate because it can be this. That's what discernment is. When I've seen a lot of people these days take the word judgment into sort of a component that was utilized in the past with the word forgiveness. That forgiveness meant that you just turn the other cheek and you don't have boundaries and you get hit again, or you walk into the same hole, without evaluating how you're not going to keep daily walking into that same hole. We have a responsibility right now to clear the air here from even our misconceptions that we have about some of these words. Wrongful judgment means that we are saying we are all innocent, someone else is all to blame, I had nothing to do with this, blah, 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 and we want to scapegoat onto somebody else external. No, we take responsibility for every moment that we can reflect properly in discernment and in the wisdom and protection that we omitted from the past. For example, the wise wisdom of the matriarchs, okay? That we do need to return to the grandmother and mother information here, and then take the wise wisdom from the patriarchal writings and match that together into their perfect balance here. So as we go on then, and I said Martin is going to introduce us to some of his information that he has looked at and taking a closer look at some of the explanations for what some of these ruins are. He is theorizing that there are different theories for what he sees some of these structures are. And so he's going to, I'm actually going to do a recording with him. So, afterwards, if we get a good video out of it, I also will, after the radio show, we're going to do a pre-recording, and then after the radio show is uploaded and that plays, we'll see if we got a good recording for the video. So I'm hoping to also have some additional pictures and everything for you. So as we are going on then, also I have invited onto the show, coming after Martin Lidke, is Martin Kenny. And Martin Kenny's YouTube channel is Flat Earth Universe. And so when I, first of all, a lot of people here are probably in the stages of thinking about a potential of a flat earth or an infinite plane or different planes of a sphere type reality, or a bowl type shaped different possible structure for what the earth is. the individuals coming on, two of them here, have different theories of our plane of reality and how we are on a particular plane with a different shape than what potentially has been referred to as this a ball globe shape floating through space. And for myself, I'm going to stay, even though a more plain theory and the theory that Martin Kenny has proposed in us to observe, that he will talk about in his cosmic egg theory, makes more sense to me. I am not limited to either one of those beliefs. In the big picture of it, reality becomes what we think it to be. We have the experience of such. And because of dreams that I've had and feelings that I have about there being waters above and waters below, that I tend to feel more resonance with some of the theory that Martin Kenny presents, in how he refers to the North Pole as being a place where maybe is a reference of where Mount Meru was the center of the earth and where we originally were born from before coming out of the more ether plane of reality into the physical plane of reality. And that first ring as we presented into. So looking at the structure that we see from Atlantis in the past being three rings, Martin presents that there is likely a Garden of Eden, hollowed out a valley that is what he maybe even references as Hyperborea, and being in the center there at the North Pole, and that we are being kept from that center by not being allowed to go in there. And theoretically then, and kind of interesting in a specific dream that I just had, is that there's possibly, because solar events are heating up the core of the earth, there are other theories out there that aren't being presented here exactly. I think it was someone like Delbert Blair that I've listened to in the past who talked about how hot the internal earth is getting. Now, in that then, a melting that can occur is going to melt and open up passageways between these different planes as well. This is a reference to when the veils between reality are thinning. So we're looking at these metaphorical aspects and these physical aspects happening at the same time, where portals open, and or at the same time a solar event can take place during this, or as Jay presents his theory, he resonates with the theory of a plasma event taking place, and those plasma beings coming through when the firmament cracks. So there is a lot to consider. Now, we don't even have to be conclusive as to which one of these is actual, because in truth, at some point in time, they all could have taken place and may be repeating cyclical events that do take place and have a cyclic return. I am a complete optimist and believe that we are all at a level and a dimensional vibration, resonance with our own inner development. So as much as we have cleansed and are functioning as clean as possible, in meaning as harmonious with the energies here, that is center. So where on a fulcrum, if two poles are going to flip one above the other, do you want to be when those poles flip? You would want to be in the center. And that is what the reference is to this the wave dream that I had, because the wave was, stories high. It was filled all the way up to the sky, this black wave coming through. And as it passed through, it was going to come onto land and go between two rocks. And then on its way back, you could also be saved. And if you were, in the dream it showed I was wearing a fisherman's hat, rain hat, and a fisherman's raincoat. I was also on the beach in between there, the land and the water. That and that in a dream references in between. So being neutral, centered, and in between is where you want to remain as much as possible with your energy field in order to pass through with what we may be experiencing. A lot of us are already familiar that the North Pole is moving very quickly. Last, I think I heard, and one of my guests can correct this, that I think it was 40 miles off and probably more by now. So that is moving at a very fast pace. And again, being a dreamer, a seer in the dream plane, and dreams having been very significant, I also had dreamt of an egg shape that had all of these bubbles within it. And the bubbles generally are apart from one another. But when a force that normally holds them apart is no longer there, these bubbles all merge together towards the bottom, like towards the bottom of an hourglass, and they merge together. So I believe that is what we are potentially experiencing, or in some point in time may experience. And based on all of these interesting references that we see in movies, there is going to be some unique differences that we are going to be experiencing in our lives here as time goes on. So we do have a scenario where on a grand scale, we look at it as we're in the third dimensional space, the middle ground. We are in Midgard. There is planes of reality above us and planes of reality below us. Yet, in the middle ground here, you could be vibrating with a lower level, a middle level, or a higher level. So these planes and octaves and everything go on. And we have now what we are seeing more than ever before, quite a diversified mix of beings, in a sense, and experiences and levels of humans operating here on very many different levels. And of course, we have a controlling faction still attempting to enforce all of their man-made laws as much as possible so that they could have control. But truthfully, that's disintegrating if you are moving out of that and away from that. Again, I'm not going to say for sure how that all plays out, but we clearly can see it happening, and there are some fundamental truths here to learn and be aware of, and to say, okay, I have a way that I know I can navigate this time frame. So with that, then, Martin is going to present his theories of the rings, the torsion fields around the cosmic egg shape, and then he is also going to talk about information that he has been putting together on a cosmic clock. So he has also added additional information in as to how he sees the time events moving and correlating together in certain alignments that are taking place. And he also theorizes that in certain alignments coming up, there is an event that takes place where there is an opening, and those who are ready can move back towards a Hyperborea, Garden of Eden location and transition into that locale. So as these doors are open, as these portals are open. And he's going to talk to us about that. He has some very interesting, which I would like to look at in a little bit more of a tenacious way of presenting some of the interesting information that he sees that we might say is the devil's advocate of some of our belief systems here. Meaning that he has proposed a little bit of a different look at some of the chemtrails, what they might be for, even though there's a lot of damage on that. Some of the different non-gender events that he sees happening in the world, and where some people can clearly see that these events have been engineered in order to be the false representations of what naturally might be occurring because of an energy shift. He wants to talk about and has presented some of his theories that he has received in his meditations, and per what vibration he's holding here for people, and how he sees we need to go into a more relaxed, this more neutral state of discernment, but not so much judgment over what is taking place. So we're going to talk about that and allow him to talk about his cosmic clock theory. So after that, then, the last show will be Steve Richards, who is the founder of Holographic Kinetics. And Holographic Kinetics is a very large institution already. I was first drawn towards Steve, seeing him in a YouTube and talking about his information about the effective work that he was doing with people with mental health issues, and how he was able to help them to remove in a way of completing a time cycle reference, a time loop that was happening within them, where they were repeating the same time loop over and over again. And he has developed from his Aboriginal studies a way of working with these time loops, and what he references is spirit, and communicating to spirit in order to remove these influences and put them back in their proper places. His Dreamtime healing is part of what the Australian Aboriginal Loremen, L-O-R-E, which stands for law, L-A-W, in the way of universal law, knew from the past and could apply. Holographic kinetics is the science behind their knowledge. Dreamtime healing is about rebalancing of the imbalances of man's internally created realities through the cycles of dimensions that man calls time. Dreamtime healing can access the internal dimensional world of all living things, the life force, the invisible, man at times calls spirit, different from the soul, as he writes, and I'm going to make a reference about this, where all creation is first set up and then flows through into the visible external world of reality. It is an advanced Aboriginal healing modality incorporating the applied knowledge of lore that governs the internal invisible dimensions of life, which no man can escape. These are different from our external laws that govern our physical reality. Now, I invited Steve on here because of his information on how he is able to, one, visualize with his intuitive sight, his psychic sight, the draconian, at times reptilian beings that are within someone's human body. Now, in his way that he works with it, in the information that he has retrieved, his theory on all of this relates to how in our history 1 million years ago, the dimensions collided and the world of the reptilian got intermeshed with the human world. Now, I bring that up because of the fact that I viewed the worlds merging together in those bubbles of reality. And of course, in what we are looking at with portals opening up, veils being thin, with technology having been advanced that possibly opened up portals that weren't supposed to be opened up, or this is simply the way that the entire big picture operates for some reason that we will only know in time after we complete something. So his information as to how dimensions of time operate per his theory are very informative right now, and his system works very well. He's been very strong in helping people who have been institutionalized even to come out of the repetitious patterns that they've been under, and his stories of healing are very extraordinary. So he has the ability to contact the different, what he refers to as spirits that have gotten into a human's physical body, especially in situations, say, of soldiers who have taken a life, and according to their tradition, his universal lore tradition, if you take a life, that person's spirit can go into your body and live. And this also happens, he says, with animals' lives that are taken before their time. And his belief system functions with this and functions well and improves. I do want to make a most interesting note that the matriarchal traditions that Phoenix has retrieved, she has different verbology for what the soul and the spirit are and what these forces are that are within us. So her terminology is different. And this is a beautiful opportunity to view how our belief systems may have different terminology over it, and we may even be truly working with an entire different belief system. But what is the ultimate outcome here is that there is healing in the end, okay? And I think the best of the best in some of what I've seen thus far is to take a look at, and I will do this in the future, the types of more detailed information that Steve has. And I'm going to talk to Phoenix about her representations of how she places the terms spirit and soul, the different dimensions of reality, and how it all operates and what she sees, what's taking place in the shadow world and the demon worlds, and work with that, even her seeing the reptilian beings in people. So if we are, of course we know there are let's look at building a building. There are similar aspects of construction that have to be adhered to in building a building. But those buildings can be entirely different, how you do it and what the outcome is going to be. So we have to kind of look at these different systems, and I want us to, instead of looking at them as being one right, one wrong, let's merge and look at them more deeply and find the fundamental core truth amongst all of them. And that's where I operate. That's where I enjoy observing how to bring diverse, different angles into better unity, while at the same time noting that there are very specific inserts of false information that do come out of people's work. Some are aware they're doing it, and some are not aware they're doing it. And they have a stake in those who are aware of it in proposing those specific imbalanced aspects, because they have a storyline with those imbalanced aspects. So when we come back here to look at these different types of healers, we want to remember that healers are moving back through their own timelines, their own specific, unique journey off of center and how it worked. So how they get back, there may be different paths and different ways of working with it. And again, let's take the best of the best as core fundamental truths and honor all of the healing, true healing that does take place here, and what fundamental truths we can, maintain between them to keep unity amongst us in this beautiful diversity that we have. So Steve has, even in his descriptions in some of his articles, he talks about the journey of light moving into different form, going into solids and minerals, becoming insects, becoming fish and birds, becoming human, going through the death cycles, becoming conscious then, the different levels of conscious awareness that humans go through, being in different densities. So there's a different density of humans here, and we have to understand that. We're not going to have optimal unity all across the entire world because we have so many different densities here right now and different octaves. So people are moving through the different stages of learning about being gullible and not aware at first, being easily fallen into being prey, then going through understanding instinct and just working on instincts, then developing an actual fight or flight. So we even basically are going through, watching the child stages just grow and becoming more aware on one level. And basically humans are going all through their different levels, just in their own different developmental stages. So people become a little bit more aware, and then they come into power. And we see this with the numbers in numerology, so that's what I can see in people's charts and different levels that people are functioning on. But at the same time, they can be on a different level of a different dimension. Like someone says, oh, I'm at a 9, I'm all complete here. Well, they might be at a 9 on octave 1 and ready to go to octave 2. And I was explaining that also in my numerology show that I did when I did live numerology readings a few shows ago. So that is very significant. And so I'm going to ask Steve some very interesting questions. He has agreed to do this interview in the midst of an exceptionally busy schedule. So I'm very grateful to him giving his time to this project here. It will be a wonderful unity of shows. I intend on working towards blending in each speaker as they speak and attempting to unite as much as possible within each other's belief systems and their perspectives. And then at the very end of all the shows, after Steve, I am going to come back and I am going to do a summary of the shows. So I will do a best of the best and talk. I may reach out to the speakers that came on and see if there's anything that they would like to add or present or anything that they learned. So talk to them again and have them provide any guidance they'd like to talk about. So with that, it is rounding up an hour and a half. And I think that's plenty for a start here. I've made my way through all of the speakers that are coming on and some of the important, significant reasons for looking at this information. And so with that, I'm going to close out for tonight and say thank you for joining me. And I hope that you're able to come back and see these shows. It will be kind of interesting for me. I am going to be recording actually a few of the shows on Zoom in video. My guests will be sharing some, pictures. So there will be a live video with it. I will, of course, only be presenting the radio shows first of all, so you'll be able to hear it first on the radio. And underneath the radio shows, I am going to have a slide presentation of the most significant videos that we're going through. But then as I'm able to after that, I'm hoping that I can get some good recordings here on Zoom and release some of those in a YouTube in video format. So thank you all. So come back because it's going to be really exciting. And then I will see you all next time on Twilight Epiphanies Radio next Thursday night. So have a beautiful, blessed week. Thank you. Bye-bye now.